Aldrich Ames sits in a federal cell, serving life for selling out America's deepest secrets. Just one of several CIA officers currently rotting in prison. His greed handed the Soviets over 100 classified operations and sent at least 10 allies to their deaths. Nearby, Joshua Schulte fights a 40-year sentence for leaking the CIA's crown jewel hacking tools, while others, like Jerry Chun-Shing Lee, traded the lives of U.S. informants for luxury from Beijing. Each of these betrayals cost more than secrets. They shattered lives, upended spy wars, and shook the very foundation of U.S. intelligence. But how did people sworn to protect the nation become its deadliest traitors? The answer starts at the precise moment easy money began to outweigh loyalty. In 1992, Aldrich Ames and his wife closed on a $540,000 home in Arlington, Virginia. The payment was made in cash. No mortgage, no loans, just a wire transfer that left real estate agents stunned. Weeks later, Ames rolled up to work at CIA headquarters in a brand new Jaguar, the $50,000 price tag a sharp contrast to his modest government salary. Neighbors noticed the sudden upgrades, designer clothes, expensive dinners, and international vacations that seemed endless. Friends overheard Ames and Rosario joking about their newfound wealth, while bank tellers grew uneasy as the couple made frequent deposits, always just under $10,000, the threshold that triggers federal reporting. CIA security officers and FBI analysts began to connect the dots. Public property records showed the house purchase, DMV filings listed the luxury car, and credit reports revealed a surge in spending. Over 8 years, investigators traced more than $1.3 million in unexplained income flowing into the Ames accounts, with most of it arriving in small, carefully spaced increments. Internal audits confirmed there was no plausible way for Ames to afford this lifestyle on a GS-15 salary. Financial specialists pored over the evidence, matching every deposit, home improvement, and trip abroad against his official pay stubs. The pattern was clear. Ames and his wife were living far beyond their means, and the money trail pointed directly to something or someone outside the agency. The paper trail grew impossible to ignore. It was the money, not any secret document or coded message, that first exposed the betrayal. As one CIA inspector later put it was the money that finally brought him down. The mounting evidence set in motion a warrant for Ames's arrest, and investigators prepared to confront a man whose greed had finally outpaced his tradecraft. The arrest of Aldrich Ames in 1994 triggered a reckoning inside the intelligence community. But outside the wire, the consequences had already been measured in human lives. Beginning in the summer of 1985, the KGB moved with surgical precision, rounding up nearly every American source inside Soviet intelligence. Over a dozen CIA assets vanished from Moscow's streets, pulled from apartments or offices with no warning. Some, like Adolf Tolkachev, a radar engineer who had passed secrets for years, were arrested, interrogated, and executed by firing squad. Dmitry Polyakov, a GRU general who spied for the United States across decades, was arrested in 1986 and executed 2 years later. Valery Martinov, Sergei Motorin, Leonid Poleshchuk, each trusted by their handlers, each betrayed by a name on a list delivered by Ames. The roll-up was swift and merciless. The CIA's Moscow station found its entire network wiped out in less than a year. At Langley, officers watched as their sources disappeared, one after another, with no chance to warn or extract them. Families of the executed were left to grieve in silence, often ostracized or relocated by Soviet authorities. The agency's own damage assessment would later confirm that at least 10 assets were executed as a direct result of Ames's disclosures, with dozens more imprisoned or forced into hiding. Operations that had taken years to build were destroyed overnight, leaving the United States blind in the heart of its greatest adversary. Inside the courtroom, Ames faced the consequences for his betrayal. In April 1994, he pleaded guilty and received a sentence of life without parole. His wife, Rosario, was sentenced to 5 years after cooperating with prosecutors. Today, Aldrich Ames remains at FCY Terre Haute, Indiana. The scars left by his treachery, measured not in dollars but in the lives lost and the silence that followed, still haunt the agency's halls. Case 2, Joshua Adam Schulte. In March 2017, WikiLeaks began releasing a series of files known as Vault 7, exposing the Central Intelligence Agency's most sensitive cyber espionage tools to the world. The leak included detailed blueprints for hacking smartphones, computers, and even smart TVs, tools that had powered American intelligence operations across dozens of countries. Malware once used to penetrate terrorist networks and rival governments now appeared on public forums, downloadable by anyone with an internet connection. The scale was staggering, over 8,000 documents and source code files representing the largest data breach in CIA history. Security experts warned that hostile states and criminal syndicates could now mimic, adapt, or defend against these digital weapons, erasing years of covert technical advantage. The agency's own internal review estimated the financial damage at hundreds of millions of dollars, with compromised operations stretching from Europe to the Middle East. Investigators traced the breach back to Schulte, a software engineer who had worked in the CIA's Operations Support Branch. There, he developed and maintained some of the very tools that were now in the wild. Colleagues described him as brilliant but volatile, often clashing with supervisors and resenting perceived slights. After resigning in 2016, Schulte retained access to classified repositories, exploiting technical loopholes to copy and exfiltrate the trove. Prosecutors argued that Schulte's motive was personal vengeance. He felt marginalized, overlooked, and determined to inflict maximum harm on the agency that, in his view, had betrayed him. The fallout was immediate and global. Intelligence partners demanded answers, while adversaries raced to patch vulnerabilities or reverse engineer the stolen code. The CIA scrambled to overhaul its cyber infrastructure, but the damage was already done. In 2024, Schulte was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. Today, at age 37, he is housed at the ADX Florence Supermax facility, a symbol of how a single insider's grudge can upend the balance of digital power. Case 3, Harold James Nicholson. In November 1996, Nicholson, a decorated CIA officer and former station chief, was arrested at Dulles International Airport as he prepared to board a flight to Zurich. He had spent years selling classified information to Russian intelligence, including the names of CIA trainees and operational details from inside Langley. Nicholson pleaded guilty in 1997 and received a 23-year sentence. But confinement did not end his career as a spy. While incarcerated at FCY Sheridan in Oregon, Nicholson began writing letters to his son Nathan. The correspondence appeared innocuous, discussions of family, coded references to birthdays and gifts. In reality, each letter contained instructions, names, meeting locations, and phrases only the two would understand. Nathan, then in his early 20s, became the courier. He traveled to Moscow, Cyprus, and Peru, meeting with Russian intelligence officers who handed over cash, sometimes in envelopes, sometimes in shopping bags. Nathan would return to the United States, relaying updates from the SVR and delivering payments to accounts controlled by his father's associates. FBI agents, monitoring prison visits and intercepting mail, began to notice patterns. Phone logs showed repeated late-night calls. Surveillance teams observed Nathan's international trips closely aligned with coded instructions from his father. In one recorded conversation, Nicholson told his son, "The family business takes care of its own." The Bureau launched a sting operation, wiring Nathan for meetings with Russian handlers. In one instance, he accepted $47,000 in cash at a Moscow hotel, with agents watching from a nearby room. Federal prosecutors charged both father and son in 2009. Nicholson admitted to orchestrating the scheme, using his son as a go-between to continue espionage for the SVR. The court added 8 years to his sentence, bringing his total to over 30. Nathan, who cooperated with investigators and expressed remorse, received probation. Nicholson was released in 2023 at age 73, his case a stark reminder that the reach of espionage can extend even behind prison walls. Between 2010 and 2012, the CIA's network inside China collapsed in a wave of arrests, disappearances, and executions. Jerry Chun-Shing Lee, a former agency case officer, had returned from Hong Kong with a thumb drive containing classified lists, names, phone numbers, and meeting locations of U.S. informants. Chinese security services, armed with this intelligence, moved methodically. One by one, American sources were summoned to closed-door interrogations, or simply vanished from their homes. Families received no answers. Some were sent to remote farms for re-education, while others, like a senior PLA officer recruited in 2005, faced public trials and execution. Official estimates put the toll at up to 20 CIA assets killed or imprisoned during this period. At least 10 were executed, their fates confirmed only through whispers among surviving contacts and rare leaks in Chinese state media. The rest disappeared into the labyrinth of the Chinese penal system, with families left to grieve in silence. Investigators later recovered evidence of Lee's betrayal, a cache of handwritten notes and digital files, along with records of over $840,000 in payments and luxury perks provided by Chinese handlers. The agency's internal review described the loss as a catastrophe, erasing years of painstaking work and leaving the United States blind in one of the world's most secretive regimes. For the men and women whose names appeared on Lee's list, the price of betrayal was paid not in dollars, but in lives ended or erased without a trace. On the morning of February 21st, 1986, guards at the Fairfax County Jail found Larry Wu-Tai Chin lifeless in his cell. He was hanging from a makeshift noose fashioned from a plastic bag and towel. tied to the vent above his bunk. The official timeline recorded Chin's death at approximately 2:30 a.m., just days before his sentencing for 4 decades of espionage on behalf of China. Jail logs indicated he had been placed under suicide watch, with officers required to check his cell every 15 minutes. Yet the records from that night soon became the subject of scrutiny. One guard claimed to have seen Chin alive during a routine check only minutes before the discovery, while another recalled irregular intervals between rounds. The autopsy, led by Dr. James Beyer, identified a single ligature groove around Chin's neck, consistent with hanging. Toxicology tests found no evidence of drugs or sedatives, and the body showed no signs of a struggle. Still, some outside pathologists questioned the shallow depth of the marks and wondered whether the plastic bag should have been accessible to an inmate under suicide precautions. Chin's defense attorney pointed to these details, arguing that the procedures for suicide watch had not been strictly followed, and raising the possibility of foul play. Jail officials maintained that any irregularities in the guard logs were minor and did not provide an opportunity for outside interference. The FBI and local authorities reviewed the case and upheld the ruling of suicide. Despite the official closure, doubts lingered. The combination of conflicting testimony, unexplained access to lethal materials, and the timing, so close to sentencing, left an enduring sense of mystery around the final hours of the CIA's longest-serving Chinese mole. In the fall of 1985, Edward Lee Howard vanished from American soil. Fired from the CIA for misconduct, he had become a liability, one the agency could not ignore. Under FBI surveillance in Santa Fe, Howard used a decoy and his wife's help to slip away. He exited through a back door, switched cars, and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a bewildered surveillance team. By the time agents realized he was gone, Howard was already on a flight out of Albuquerque, traveling under a false name arranged by the KGB. His journey led through Helsinki and into the heart of Moscow, where Soviet intelligence welcomed him as both asset and captive. Inside Russia, Howard lived under constant watch. The KGB assigned him an apartment, a stipend, and a security detail. Neighbors in his Moscow building remembered a foreigner who kept to himself, always glancing over his shoulder. Over the years, Howard gave interviews, wrote a memoir, and insisted that he was neither traitor nor hero, just a man forced into exile by a government that betrayed him first. In July 2002, Russian authorities reported Howard's death at his dacha outside Moscow. Official accounts claimed he fell down a flight of stairs, breaking his neck. Yet the details left room for doubt. Medical records noted bruising on his wrists and faint ligature marks, though the coroner's report called it accidental trauma. Some neighbors recalled hearing an argument and raised voices minutes before the fall. U.S. intelligence officials received only a brief summary. No autopsy, no photographs, no independent verification. Theories swirled: suicide, accident, or a quiet silencing by those who no longer needed him. With no conclusive evidence, Howard's end remains as shadowed as his escape. A story that refuses to settle, even decades later. Frank Turpel's post-Sieg. A career reads like a blueprint for global mayhem. After his dismissal, he built a sprawling arms pipeline that stretched from Mediterranean airstrips to war rooms in Tripoli and Kampala. Using forged end-user certificates, Turple moved weapons and explosives under the cover of legitimate business, masking shipments as civil engineering supplies. Corsica became a favored launch point, with chartered cargo flights ferrying Czech and East German mines, plastic explosives, and silenced pistols to clients who paid in cash or political favor. His client roster included some of the world's most brutal leaders. Idi Amin relied on Turple for both weapons and mercenaries, using foreign experts to train his security forces and death squads. In Libya, Muammar Gaddafi tapped Turple for surveillance technology and explosives, along with the recruitment of Western specialists for covert operations. U.S. intelligence later linked his shipments to terrorist attacks in Europe and arms caches found in Uganda. Explosives traced back to Turple surfaced in the aftermath of the 1981 Vienna synagogue bombing, while his mercenary teams appeared in conflicts spanning the Middle East and Africa. In 1980, a federal grand jury indicted Turple on 53 counts, including illegal arms export and conspiracy to commit murder. He fled before trial, moving first to Lebanon, then Syria, and finally Cuba, where he lived openly until his death from heart failure in 2016. Turple never expressed regret, boasting in interviews that he armed the causes of chaos and outmaneuvered American justice for decades. His empire left a trail of violence and unanswered questions, a legacy built on the tools of his former trade. Aldrich Ames alone was paid $4.6 million for betraying over 100 CIA operations, a number unmatched in U.S. espionage history. The cases in this documentary reveal how greed, resentment, and divided loyalties have cost lives and collapsed intelligence networks. From Soviet-era betrayals to digital-age leaks like Vault 7, facts from court records, financial statements, and agency files lay out the immense damage. Over 30 informants executed or jailed, and cyber tools exposed worldwide. Yet, key details remain sealed. Full lists of compromised assets, exact sums transferred, and the precise failures that let these officers evade early detection. Today, strict financial monitoring and cyber countermeasures exist because of these breaches. But as classified records remain locked and new threats emerge, one lesson stands clear. The agency's greatest dangers have often come from within its own ranks.